now my pleasure to bring to you Miss Acuna and her paper, Parting Words.
Achilles as a character presents a paradox between two conflicting faiths, between divine rage and human free will, and between God and man. Though he knows the two fates laid in store for him, either gain glory and die young, or live long and die in obscurity, he claims not to worry over them. Before Patroclus' death, he vacillates between staying with the Achaeans or deserting Troy altogether, seething with inconsolable rage over the dishonor Agamemnon deals him. Yet Achilles' indecision truly stems from his inability to understand who he truly is, God or man. The following dialogue takes place directly after Achilles gives Patroclus permission to fight the Trojan rout that surges forward even to their very ships. As the two of them discuss the matters of fate, free will, and identity, Patroclus proposes that what Achilles truly desires, the reconciliation between his own godhood and humanity, can only come about through accepting his fate and exercising his will over his own rage. His anguish over the doom of the Achaeans now appeased, Patroclus persisted in his speech.
I was told that Achilles would listen to me, and so he has. I will shoulder your armor in order that the Achaeans do not all perish before you have overcome your wrath. Yet listen to me again. When I am gone, release this overweening anger of yours, or if you cannot do so, conquer it. Your desire for glory has so blinded you that you ignore the prophecies your sea-born mother has revealed, the twin, twisted fates that you must choose. You have thrown yourself recklessly into your rage. Yes, you have submitted to it. Let it control you completely. If you were not a man, you would be a god. Intractable, a will driven by itself alone, pure rage and force. Yet you are shackled by your manhood, tethered to your humanity. Humble yourself, Achilles, and tame your rage, so that when I return to you, I might find a man willing to accept his fate and himself.
Patroclus, what is it you are trying to say to me? I've accepted my fate. Yes, I have had no choice but to accept my fate. From the very moment of my birth, the offspring of a goddess and a man. For Tadebanta Yakizi Kerabnos, and every last life has already been drawn out by the hands of fate, her scissors already pinching the mark where they will die. Whatever fate decrees, the gods carry out, and when she is silent, they work their inexorable will anyways, fighting amongst themselves if they must. This rout we see now is like any other in the 10 long years we have stayed here. Another trifling slaughter where the throats of lords are slit by the swords of kings, only to be replaced by more waiting in their ships, eager to prove their own day of glory before it is snatched away, all in a grand sacrifice to the eternal gods who usher them along to their deaths. I do not rebel against my fate. I know what it is the oracles have laid out for me, what the gods will turn my path towards. Should I stay here, gain everlasting glory at Troy, my life will be cut short, and if I leave, return to my home in peace and without glory, my life will last long. I tell you, Patroclus, that my fate is clear. I have never tried to deny it. Should I try to throw off these prophecies, find some fate outside of the gods' will, I can only be a madman and destined for destruction. For the gods, who guard the order of the world, would crush a man who dared to disrupt the laws of heaven and earth. All bend to their divine will. Only gods challenge other gods. And even then, fate knows who will triumph, having every life thread, mortal and divine, in her weaver's hands. No, as a man, I am subject to them. I will admit that.
Will you make no decision then? When he is faced with two courses of action, a lord will consider both and make his decision swift, for only he knows and can follow the right path. Yet you, when we first came to Troy, our ships cutting into the beaches, you were aflame with desire and resolve, ready to fell 1,000 men in a divine frenzy. Take back Troy and slaughter their sons before their fathers and gain glory, 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 and die. Now one day you say you will leave on the morrow, choose your life of peace and lay aside any glory you might gain. And on the other you declare you will stay and fight in the days to come after Agamemnon has paid you the respect you are due. No decision you will make, no course of action set upon and followed. No, you will not rebel against your fate. So you refuse to act entirely. When given the two paths your life may follow, you are caught between the two.
And how can I act when I cannot know the lot the gods will cast my way? I can no more prevent or choose my fate than divert the course of the river. Perhaps I shall decide I want to live as a man, forgotten, a shadow of a memory lost by the next generation. Yet the gods grant me glory, and my life is choked. I may choose glory and forever struggle for it, desiring in vain that my descendants might speak my name in reverence, only for the gods to snatch my glory from my seeking hands and leave me doomed to die in an unmarked grave. And if I desire both, if I dared to desire a life of long-lasting glory, like a crowned tree towering over the plain, what good would it do? It does not matter what I may desire. The gods above always have their plans. Is it not better that I accept what the gods will and submit to their divine authority?
Achilles, perhaps a weaker man might allow himself to grow lax and refuse to make a decision. Yet to submit to mere apathy is not like you. It is unbefitting to your very nature. One does not say that a commander is powerless because he does not know the outcome of the battle before it begins. We even praise a soldier who, knowing his doom, refuses to submit and defends his standing until he is felled upon it, holding against his deadly fate until his soul breaks from his throat in his final breath. You may not know where your actions will lead, what fate the gods will grant, but you may still decide how you will act, for you will act nevertheless, fate or no fate. You are right. None can escape the path the gods have laid before them. You need not walk their path blindly.
In this way, Patroclus counseled him, min phonisa se thea torrenta. Yet Achilles remained silent, brooding over his thoughts.
Raise your hand.
Bemused but willing to obey his friend, Achilles raised his hand, extending it like a lord commanding his armies, calling out to them in ringing tones to call them to battle, his unconscious gesture holding them all in sway. Patroclus pushed it back down with his own, simple, boyish joy shining from his face.
Could the gods have predicted that? Does Apollo look upon us now, shaking his fist in trembling rage that he neglected his duty to watch, lest you should raise your hand and I should push it down? No. There are actions you may take that the gods can never stop and will never know of. None can predict what will happen to him, but each can choose what he does.
Then tell me, Patroclus, which fate should I make my own? Patroclus became silent, deliberating over his answer, for how could he command his master?
I cannot decide for my lord, yet I fear that until you release the rage you hold, this rage set aflame with your desire for glory, no decision can you make. Far be it from me to command you to lay aside a life of honor, one retold among legends of gods and heroes in ages to come, when all else has faded away. As your great friend, you know I want nothing more for you than the life and glory you are deserving of. Yet you have laid aside reason in a dogged pursuit of glory alone, plunging recklessly into rage, senseless rage. It is not natural anger you nurse within your breast, Achilles. If you were only angered that Agamemnon stole fair Briseis, provoked the dishonor he inflicted when he bore away your prize, you should have laughed and released your anger when his embassy came to you, wily Odysseus, dear patient Phoenix and level-headed Ajax, to plead that you return to battle. 1,000 gifts Agamemnon would have given you, and Briseis too, though a shameful, gritted smile that you could have reveled in, having received your due. Yet you refused him. This venomous rage that you feed, that drapes over your shoulders and curls around your throat like a serpent, Achilles, I will not lie to you, you have glutted it. And yet it feeds until I fear it will consume you entirely.
Patroclus, you need not be alarmed. How can I be conquered or controlled by a rage that is all my own? Did I not rightfully relent once Ajax spoke, strong and straightforward as a warrior? I vowed I would not fight until Hector himself lunged forward with maddened bloodlust to my own encampments. Agamemnon can ask no more of me than that, after his shameless envy and treachery. Do not think that I am compelled by my rage to do these things. I have chosen these actions, with full knowledge and intention of what I did.
The actions you have taken have been of your own will, I know, but Achilles, did you not choose them with intent, knowing precisely what they were and what they would bring? Before Ajax uttered a word, you were determined to leave by the next dawn, so enraged were you by Odysseus' cloying words. Even now you send me alone because you relented only slightly, not enough to allow yourself to join the war once more, after telling Ajax that you would not fight until the troops swarmed about your own ship. You long for battle, to lead your men and win glory, yet because of your reckless words you are loath to retract them now in shame. Were you thinking of your fate when you vowed you would not fight, of the long days you would wait, watching other men die or win glory, hoping that Troy would not be taken in the meantime? It is your choice that you should sacrifice your fate to uphold a vow. Is it your choice that you should sacrifice your fate to uphold a vow spoken in wrath? Agamemnon is a dog, risking the entire fate of the army by bringing down Apollo's righteous anger, all for a girl. Yet when the dog nipped at you, you snapped back. Have you become no better than a beast, Achilles, that even a cur dishonoring you with his lying tongue may spark such wrath within your chest that you can think of nothing else but to strike at the cost of everything? Can such retaliation truly be called your rational choice, selected with intent and wisdom?
What else could I have done when the commander of our fleet refutes all wisdom, bucking any sensible choice in order to follow his own willful desires? Should I have said nothing when his obstinacy would have brought the gods' destruction upon us all over a silly girl? Nay, perhaps when he snatched Briseis from me, my beautiful prize, earned by my own sword, I should have submitted like a slave myself to his will, accepting punishment for speaking words of wisdom to an idiot. Better it is, then, that we should all pander to the will of a pig, lest we should fall into the slightest anger. The merest echo of the man warms the blood within me, that spiteful vulture doing nothing for himself and feeding upon what his subordinates bring to him, made slaves by the chains of obligation and respect. And why should I not be enraged? Is it not natural and reasonable that my rage, my will, and my choice should act in accordance or against my circumstances? I cannot act if I do not act upon. I cannot exert my will unless I retaliate.
You misunderstand me, Achilles, and again your fury spits its venom. Please do not turn your anger upon me, thinking I'm trying to defend the man if he is not a beast entirely. He is unimportant. If the world is just, the only enduring memory of him in the coming ages will be as a weak-willed tyrant, upheld solely by those beneath him. Yet my purpose is with you, Achilles, not with him. He will always be making foolhardy decisions, always undermining himself with his envy of any man who dares have more than him, more power or virtue or respect. You cannot always act in response to him. You have your own desires and goals, your own fate to seek. You are a soldier and the son of a king. Your natural element is to conquer and to lead. Why sacrifice that to retaliate against a man who will only blunder again? Your choices are not confined by him. You must choose for yourself.
What real choice do I have then, Patroclus? The will of the gods, the fate they have chosen for me, their hand in this war, these are all things outside of my control. Yet when I choose to live without letting fear of my fate control me, you say I've submitted to apathy. When I choose to give Agamemnon his earned punishment for his foolishness, you say I have submitted to my rage. If you were to examine every part of me, walk to the boundaries of my soul, you would find that there is no action I have chosen of my own will, entirely free from influence. If it is not my own will to be angered, what, if anything, is my own choice?
Perhaps I'm too harsh with you, Achilles, for I myself do not know. Yet I know that we have the freedom to choose what is good and true, and your rage has blinded you to that. If one reads his past, searches for every reference, every foreign influence or force upon him, perhaps he might conclude that none of his actions were truly his, and instead belonged to a myriad of touches from numberless, bodiless hands. But we know that now, in this moment, our actions are ours. And even you can choose without your anger. Your rage cannot be all that you will, my friend, for without it, you still exist and choose. What shall it be? Your ceaseless search for glory, wherever you might find it, or peace, whatever it might cost?
I have no answer for you, Patroclus. Like you, I do not always know.
Only moments do we have before I must surely leave. Please, do not let me go without hearing your answer. If you cannot decide, what is it that prevents you?
Patroclus, my prince, do you know what it is to be both man and God? I am divided in two, split between all the passion, fury, and force of godhood, and everything else in me that keeps me bound to this mortal body. My lineage, my duty, my desires, those things which I love. The four winds, gods in their own right, skim across the world at the behest of others, higher gods. Yet they are subject to Aeolus. They know my lot, to be sealed by a space, a body too small to hold their power. Among men I am revered, the demigod upon the field of battle. Yet among the gods I am only a demigod, another son of another goddess, destined to live and die in my day, and disappear as a shadow into the realm of Hades. Am I only a man with the spirit of a god within me, a body compelled by a force beyond myself? Or am I a god, bound and stifled within a husk of a mortal form, imprisoned by that vessel which guarantees me life at all? I do not know. I do not know. I only know that it is my lot to have these twin forces within me, one dominating the other, yet I cannot say which, for they twist together like snakes in the dirt, writhing in death throes, and none can say which is dying. How can I know what path I desire, which way is wisest, whether I am even free to choose such things when this battle rages within me? As a man, I am beaten down by a divine rage I cannot hold. As a god, I am foiled in any effort to exert my will by the vessel I am contained within. When I am wronged by Agamemnon, godly fury rises within me, a force of nature, a vengeful tide that will wipe him out, send him howling down to Hades. Yet I am his subordinate, as a man, and the gods descend to check me before I defy their will. I can only feel, chained by the vows I made in my rage, the vows I should fulfill, yet cannot, due to my manhood. Do you understand me, Patroclus? Can you still tell me to choose between two fates when I do not even know what I am?
Achilles, I cannot know your struggle, nor can I tell you to choose. I am only a man. Yet I do know, as your friend and companion, and I know that between a god and man and you, there is no one and the other. Achilles in his rage is still Achilles. Achilles in his kindness is still Achilles. Gods and men will be divided as beings in conflict, the one the slave of the other, the one the sovereign will, and the other the subdued servant. Yet in you there can be no division. The substance of you, which is God, cannot prevail, for it too is man. And what is man within you cannot sully your godhood, for it itself is God. There is no one side and the other side. You are a god and man. Whatever you will, it is you who wills. Whatever you desire, it is you who desires. Achilles, tell me, as both God and man, one and the same, what do you desire?
I want glory and a long life to enjoy it. I want to vanquish Troy with you by my side, to end this wearisome war with its useless heartache and futile bloodshed, and set sail once more for my home in all the glory of a conqueror. I want to be with my father when his life leaves him, and to shoulder the weight of kingship in his memory. I want the prizes I have struggled for to be recognized by kings and gods alike, and held in reverence by my subjects. And when I grow old, I want you with me when I pass on to Elysium, with heirs surrounding me and an honorable inheritance to leave for them.
I would wish to live to see it all done.
You see why I cannot choose. That life can never be mine. There is nothing I can do to defy my fate and aim for what I desire.
Let the gods worry over fate, leaving her machinations at her loom. It is our lot to accept what they have planned. Yet against all odds, can we not hope for more? They cannot dictate your desires. They cannot prevent you from raising your hand. Is it not better to desire, to choose an impossible fate rather than to ignore the future entirely, refusing to accept it or rebel against it, living blindly according to what passion seizes us next? We can still desire. The gods may send us down their decrees from the gods may send down their decrees from the heavens as to what will happen around us, but we can still decide what we shall do.
Beyond the encampments of the Myrmidons, the roar of battle surged, a senseless din of men crying out in terror as the Trojans bore down upon them like ravening eagles, piercing the bodies of their prey with cruel talons, tearing into their throats with blood-hungry calls, goading their comrades on to defeat. And above it all rose the shriek of fire, fire that leapt up the ship to swallow it whole, and a blazing tongue that blotted out the sky. To arms! Patroclus, prince and master horseman, there is no time for you to tarry longer here. They must not cut off our escape. Don my armor, quickly, and I must rouse the troops for battle. They have been held back for far too long.
Before you go, please, let me return to Achilles, who is at peace.
You were told I would listen to you, and I have. Listen to me now. When you have beaten back disaster from the ships, come back to me, so that we may return home all the sooner. Do not attempt to deprive me of my rightful glory. Whatever fate, whatever doom the gods have laid in store for me, let it be all my own. Patroclus bowed to his lord and smiled for his friend.
Let it be as you say. I will return to you, and we shall depart from this war together.
very much, Ms. Acuna. I would like to begin kind of with a detailed question here. You give the picture of the Eagles right towards the end, and I was not sure if there was a connection there between that event and the subject of what was going on. Is there a connection there that you
Between
make?
that and what was going on?
Yes.
Not particularly, aside from the fact that I would say that comparing them to beasts and the way that they attack kind of implies that they have no will of their own, in the sense that the gods are really what's at play here. These men are just another pawn, another beast in the struggle of Troy.
Yeah. Throughout the paper, you're giving a convincing picture of just how difficult it is to separate, how much free will we actually have and how much we seem to just be the pawns of our own emotions. And you got me thinking about Bonnie's paper yesterday and kind of the whole thing about music working upon our emotions and that changing our actions. And Odysseus with the sirens there, and how men would usually do something because of their emotions that actually be self-destructive. And so it looks like we are very much shaped by our emotions. And what emotions, what desires we have seems to be a huge part of our character. And so if that character and our emotions are going to determine our actions, I've heard a phrase that I thought was kind of interesting, and I was wondering how much you'd agree with it. It says, character is destiny. How much would you agree with that statement?
On the surface of it, I think it would be true. I think the link between emotions and our character itself, and this is something that I guess I could address in the last point where he's struggling between God and man. I think part of the problem with wrestling with our emotions is that we tend to separate them from ourselves and say that, this rage is not mine and so it controls me. When we acknowledge that that rage is all our own, we're able to say, this is part of me, but I don't want that part to be the only part of me. So by saying, I have other goals outside of Agamemnon, or I have other goals outside of what my rage desires me to do, I can still choose for myself and according to my character what I will do. I think in the context of the paper, given that Achilles in the end is caught between two fates, his destiny in a sense is not entirely his own, but his destiny is intrinsically linked to his character because he is both God and man, and those two destinies are very much linked to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, throughout the paper you kind of looked at Achilles' position as being God and man. It's an tension between those two aspects. How much in that of Achilles' position are you seeing us just as human beings? Do we inhabit a similar space to him, or is he kind of a special case?
I think to some degree in the specifics he is a special case, but I do think the idea of us being torn between two things, one that seems the more powerful and also limited, another being the limiting, I think that still relates to us as human beings. Writing this paper, I was often called to mind of the spiritual and the fact that we often battle between the idea of, I have this part of me that says, reason, I should do this, but my flesh, if we want to call it that, says another thing. And we tend to divide the two and say that, one ought to be leading, but this one drags it down, very Platonic idea of that, which I don't believe to be the case. It's only by the unification of the two that we can really acknowledge ourselves as human beings, not merely spiritual beings caught in an earthly vessel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there doesn't seem to be any particular part of us that is entirely free of the battle between these different forces. And you did bring up the case of animals, and we usually do think of animals as being, they have no free will. They just act in accordance with, their instincts, or we might say their emotions. And yet there's this example that you pull from Tolstoy, the thing of, I have free will, watch, I'll raise my hand. I've got free will. And how much of a proof of free will is that sort of thing to point to say, here, look, I can choose what I'm doing. I've just done it right now.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a very convincing argument for this sense of our own solid possession of free will?
Yeah, I think It depends, because on the surface of it, raising your hand seems like a very inconsequential action. I'm called mind of Aristotle, because when I was reading him for this paper, he said that animals, or young children, he says, have voluntary will, but they do not have choice yet, in the case of children, according to Aristotle at least. Whereas with Tolstoy, he says, by the very fact that I raise my hand, I know I have free will. I think in that case, when we talk about animals or young children, it's often their actions are like Achilles in retaliation. So you affect them, they have a reaction. Whereas with the hand, I think it's an example that has to be read into because it's an absurd example. But with the hand, there is no reason for me to raise my hand right now. There's no reason why I should shrug as I speak or anything like that. But because it's so absurd, I know that because nothing could have influenced me to do something so silly, it must be me who is doing it. I think that's what Tolstoy is trying to get to with that example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does seem a totally inconsequential action, and certainly I may have complete free will in such an inconsequential action, but as soon as you put it in the context of anything consequential, free will seems much more flimsy. I mean, if I were to try to run into battle, I'm ordered to charge, and now I look before me at the prospect of my own death, I wonder if my body would just freeze. And it utterly controlled by my fear. And I say, I'm making the free will choice to, go valiantly into battle when perhaps I'd be incapable of moving. And so, how much would you say that yes, we have free will, but only when things don't really matter?
I would say that those things, we have free will when it comes to the present, I would say. And of course our present is influenced by our past in that, I am not in the physical condition to run 50 miles like Audrey might be. But if I train for perhaps 6 years, maybe I'll be able to get there. So in the same way, in this present, I may not be able to do that, but it's not impossible for me to do so. And at the same time, I think, yes, we tend to overestimate how much will we can enforce on our circumstances. For example, I cannot enforce whether or not I'm going to die or not. That seems already pretty decided for me. But at the same time, I can choose what I will do before I will die, to a certain degree. I can't control when that will come. I cannot control how that will come, necessarily. But I can control what I will do before it does.
Mm-hmm. In the case of Achilles, how much would you say that he kind of goes through periods of free will and not free will? Like when Hector, can you say he has this goal of glory, and so he's making this choice to gain glory. He's doing this in a fairly straightforward choice manner. But when his friend Patroclus is killed on the field of battle, his whole life changes, and everything alternates around this new passion burning through his soul for revenge. And would you say that Achilles himself there is an example of kind of the maybe even kind of shifting spectrum from possibility of free will until boom, he can't do anything but run into battle and try to avenge his friend's death?
Yes, and my ending is a rather cheeky one, given that I say that Patroclus should return, and we all know he does not. So in that case, I think, is it Achilles' wax then? I would say yes, given that it is his rage that compels him. He has finally chosen his fate, albeit for a reason that he did not foresee, or foresaw but could not have prevented. At the same time, is he exerting his choice? No, but I don't know if he cares anymore. I don't think he cares about exerting his will in that case, because this is what he wants. He wants to be enraged. He wants to avenge his friend. I don't think he cares anymore.
Thank you very much. Other questions?
Love the paper. I was just wondering what you would think. Like, does Achilles' revenge on Hector, especially in regards to Hector's body, serve as a detriment to his gaining glory? Because everyone is saying, like, this treatment of Hector's body is dishonorable and you really should give it back. So do you think that Achilles allows himself to be so consumed by his desire for revenge that he even puts his own chance of glory at risk?
Whether or not that puts his glory at risk, I wouldn't say so, because he's already achieved his glory. He's brought down Hector, and now the tide of battle is completely completely changed. So in a sense, this is just, in the God's plan, this is extraneous details, I would say. Aside from the fact that you now have Achilles desecrating a body, which is very much not something that the gods want, as per last debate. So in that case, I would say it's not consequential to his glory, but it's definitely has to do with his rage, given that's what the Iliad is about.
Alright, thank you.
White.
Thank you. What inspired you to write this paper? Because very unique paper, which I really enjoy. It was fun to listen to. So, what reading, might have made you consider going all the way back to GBT1 for this paper?
I need to stop that question. I need questions that are not of a personal nature. We need to keep focused on the topic of the paper. So, thank you very much. Next question.
Peter.
Yes, so we have right here Patroclus talking to Achilles, trying to reason with him to make a choice between, kind of his rage seeming to control him, and his peaceful nature wanting to not fight a battle. Is it indecisive of Achilles to not be able to choose between peace or glory, that he tries to choose both? Is that indecisive of him? And also is Patroclus being contrary, because the one moment he's kind of wanting Achilles to make a choice, but the next he's like, well, you don't want to just go all out.
Right. I think that is kind of the intersection between, Patroclus wants Achilles to make a choice of his fate, because by not doing so, by not exerting his will at all, he's not actually making any mark. He's not actually doing anything. So it is important to Patroclus that Achilles makes a decision. As far as his hesitation then with the rage, I would say Patroclus wants Achilles to make a decision, but he also does not want him to make it blindly. So with his rage will blind him to anything, and he'll choose whatever he wishes without thinking first, is this what I actually want? Do I want glory? Do I want peace? What is it that I actually am going to go for? And his rage tends to, I believe, propel him towards things without actually first thinking about it. He may eventually choose, yes, I will do glory, even though it's not primarily driven by rage. He may still choose that, but it's important that he does not immediately choose based on rage. Andres. You're not a student anymore, so I gotta wait.
There's like 3 or 4 different versions of the question that I have. I guess firstly, it took me a little bit to realize this was a creative adaptation. So I guess kudos for that, because it seemed like, it took me a bit to realize, wait, this isn't Homer. He hasn't interjected enough. But that being said, there were some noticeable differences in the characters of Achilles and Patroclus that I found interesting. For one thing, Patroclus seems a little wiser, not as youthfully innocent, and Achilles sort of struggles with the sort of dichotomy of his humanity and his divinity, which is something that isn't as apparent in the Iliad, or at least in Homer's text. So I guess that being said, they're not fundamentally different characters from the original characters, but they're slightly tweaked such that you could, in essence, rewrite this same story without the backdrop of Achilles and Patroclus, and you get something very similar philosophically. My question is, what about Achilles and Patroclus as characters and what they embody led to keeping it as a backdrop, even though the characters were somewhat tweaked?
First off, you attacking my characterization? But anyway, the reason I chose Achilles primarily was because the idea for my paper came about because of Achilles. I couldn't really detach the idea of fate, free will, and identity, the 3 things that I really wanted to talk about, from Achilles, given that it's so vital to his character that he struggles with them. As far as Patroclus being a little bit wiser, Achilles being a little bit more openly struggling, yes, I would say so. I believe it's the book before, so this happens in the events of the book 16. Book 15, Nestor explicitly asks Patroclus to go and advise Achilles, because you're the older and the wiser, he will listen to you. Which I suppose you could make that argue for my characterization. I also have to make them say things a bit more clearly, Because in book 16, Achilles, when Patroclus says, I know you may be struggling with your fates, Achilles goes, whoa. What fates? We're fine around here. But which is clearly not the case. So I do have to make them speak a little bit more openly about that. But yes, I couldn't really divorce the idea of my paper from the characters themselves. It's very integrally entwined in my mind. Yes, Henrik?
Yeah, this is the beginning of about the middle of the paper. It says, what else could I have done when the commander of our fleet refutes all wisdom and bucking any sensible choice in order to follow his own willful desires? Should I have said nothing when his obstinacy would have brought the gods' destruction upon us all over a silly girl? The first phrase, what else could I have done? It seems that in the circumstance he is describing himself as one who does not have a will. And is it possible that our circumstances, in a sense, do take from us the possibility of the exertion of will?
Yes, and that's really what I was trying to get at this point, where he says, I do not act if I do not act upon. I cannot exert my will unless I retaliate, in that same part, that same paragraph. Mostly because, to a certain degree, we act in the context of our circumstances. So no matter what we do, we may say that we have no will at all because our circumstances dictate all we do. But again, I don't think that is the case, because there are clearly things that we can take into action, or that we can do that are influenced by our circumstances, but there's always a choice presented. For example, it would be an absurd choice for Achilles to make not to say something in that instance, but Achilles could have chosen to stay silent. He could have chosen to maybe allow someone else to speak to Agamemnon, or maybe he could have secretly, gone behind Agamemnon's back and done it another way. Obviously, all of those things would result in different consequences, and none of them particularly good. So you may say that in here there was no good decision, he did not have will. But he still did have decisions, all of them bad, but they were still there. So I do believe in general our decisions, our will, are in a sense limited by our circumstances, in that we are all human beings. We all live in the world and are to some degree subject to it, but we still have decisions to make.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting how we oftentimes use phrases that seem to imply that we have no decision. We say, I just have to do this, or I don't have a choice. We make those statements, and the phrase that you read is actually the next one I wanted to ask you about. He says, I cannot act if I do not act upon. And I'm not sure what you mean by that. What does that phrase mean?
Yes, I would say it's primarily explained by the previous question, that is it not natural and reasonable that my rage, my will, my choice should act in accordance or against my circumstances? The key point being here, should act in accordance or against my circumstances. So in a sense, Achilles is saying he cannot act if he does not act upon his circumstances. He is not divorced from the reality in which he lives. So if he's going to act at all, it's going to be something related to what he's in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it does seem, some people have more complicated circumstances than others. Going back to Tolstoy, and that whole thing where he describes Napoleon as very much the outworking of the choices of his soldiers. And you get this impression that as you kind of work up the chain of command, the higher up you get on the chain of command, the less choice you have. That the foot soldier down at the bottom has more choice in choosing to march to Moscow than Napoleon does in leaving. And so I guess coming back again, how much can you say circumstance does bring us to the point where you can say, I have no choice?
I don't believe that circumstance can really ever bring us to the fact that we have no choice. It just limits the range of our choices. So in a sense, one could say that yes, circumstances will limit your choice. I do not have wings, I cannot fly, that limits my choice by the human vessel that I live in. However, at the same time, I have many other choices that I can still make. So Napoleon, in the case of the commander, his choices are obviously limited. Perhaps he cannot just decide, tomorrow I am not going to fight, I'm going to sit in my tent and drink tea all day, which he probably did anyways. But he still has choices to make, even if he is limited in how the range that he can act upon.
Other questions?
Peter?
You said the three things you wanted to talk about was fate, free will and identity. Suppose you don't know your identity. At that point in time, is it fate that's guiding you, or your own free will being exerted, even though you don't know what you're doing, you don't know who you are?
I think, in a sense, if one does not know their identity, it does not necessarily mean that they do not have an identity. It means that it is still showing itself in different ways, but one can recognize it as one's identity. So in the case of Achilles, his identity is, as both man and God. So his fate is a natural outworking of that. His choice between, do I choose glory, godhood, and die young because he's in part man, or does he live in peace, not be in glory, lives a man and die in obscurity? Those two things are necessarily part of the fact that he is God and man. He would not have those choices if he were merely a man or merely a God. So I would say that fate and free will are both the natural outworkings of identity, even if we don't know our own identity. Simon?
It's just a brief question. Can you define identity?
Thanks. I would say the simplest and the vaguest way I can define that is who or what we are, in the sense that, it is really, what is my will, who am I, what is my existence really, what is the nature of my existence? Do I live as a human being? Obviously, in this case, I live as a person with brown hair, although I suppose I could change that, couldn't change my DNA though. So I will always be a brunette at heart, I suppose. So, in a sense, identity is what we are, and the nature of our existence. I'm not sure if that answers your question because it's a vague thing anyway. I don't know.
I think it does.
Yes.
For a lot of these factors.
Molly.
I don't know if this question is a little too nitpicky almost, but I guess obviously like you look at Achilles in a different light, I would say, than most of us in GBT1 or even like over the years, because you bring up the struggle like of the two kind of clashing existences of his divinity and his manhood, which maybe I just don't recall the discussion. We never really like went that in depth with his character. So first of all, amazing job with that. I thought that was so interesting and unique. I guess my question for you is, do you think because even though he is different than the other characters in the Iliad, because he has that divinity, should we as the readers, I guess, still hold him to the same standards, or his actions accountable the same way? Or do you think that we should consider more like his, again, because you painted his rage and how powerful it was, you kind of credit that to his divine nature. So like his manhood, like his almost his flesh vessel could almost contain it. So I guess what are your thoughts on that? I can rephrase the question if it's confusing.
I think I got it.
Okay.
And I think this applies to anything. In essence, I will say, someone having a bad day explains their actions, but it does not excuse their actions. So Achilles may be, at war between God and man, and he may be having a really bad time over it. But that doesn't really excuse the fact that he, takes Hector's body and drags it behind his chariot in the dust while his people look on. That's still something that is very, I say problematic. So it's not, it does not excuse his actions, but it certainly does, I think, bring depth to how we view him. So we're still allowed to diss Achilles when we want to, but we can still look at him in more depth.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Robert.
Yeah, so great paper. I loved it. I love Iliad. I love what you did with this paper. My question is, throughout pretty much the majority of the Iliad, Achilles is given time and time again to make choices on pretty much anything he wants. Like for instance, not fighting in the beginning, stopping to fight multiple times. So my question is really, at what point does his fate really kick in? And what point does he lose the will to keep making choices? Versus, does he always have the choice in the end? And is it really fate that's making him make these choices? Or is it just him thinking that he's bound to these decisions which his mother gave to him, right?
Yes. I think there's no point at which he cannot exert his will. I think the problem comes that Achilles is equating, in my paper, the fact that what will happen to him is limited, and equating that with what he can do is limited. He can do many different things, but because he views his fate as fixed, which it kind of is really, he sees that he cannot do anything about that, so he does nothing. So in a sense, his will is not necessarily limited at any point. He could choose to gain glory, kill Hector, and then return to his ships and sulk over, I should not say sulk, that's a bit cruel, mourn over Patroclus, which he does. And that is still within his will. At that point, his fate is already in its workings. It's going to happen at this point. So yes, his will is not necessarily limited around it.
Okay. Thank you.
Sarah?
Would you say, and this might be venturing off a bit, would you say identity is already there and becomes revealed as, let's say, Achilles, his identity was already there, but he revealed it more as he understood the struggle between his God self and his man self, or would you say he created his identity?
Yes, that's a really good question. I would say there are certain aspects of his identity that were, fixed from the moment of his birth, given that his mother was a goddess, his father was a man. He is naturally going to be a demigod. That's not something he can really control about his identity. As far as to, in this sense, expression of identity also says something about your identity, because he could choose to live as a man and live peaceably. And it would seem that that is his identity now. No matter what kind of godhood he might have, but he's chosen this aspect of his identity, and that he's made that his own. Conversely, he might choose to live as a god and die young, and he has, in a sense, chosen that identity. His manhood, I guess you could say, is still there, but it's his godhood that we acknowledge as his identity, because that is what he has chosen. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Annika?
Would you say Achilles' actions are more weighted on his control and his will, or his instinct or reaction?
Achilles' actions are influenced more by his will or by his rage, you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
His reaction.
I would say yes. Instinct. I would say it depends on the situation. And really, it's difficult to divide, right? Because, instinct and rage and will, he does equate his rage and will, his choice at one point as being the same thing. It's very difficult to divide. I would say at certain points we may say he acts with less forethought than other points. For example, retaliating against Agamemnon and saying, okay, Agamemnon, you can take him Briseis, I'm going to go sulk in my tents for a good few months until something dreadful happens. So in that case, I would say that is more of an instinctual reaction that now he holds to because it was the decision he made. Whereas, we'll say in the death of Patroclus, I would say that his idea of revenge is definitely instinctual in the sense that he is immediately full of rage, and he is immediately ready to go fight. At the same time, I guess you could say it is an aspect of his will. Again, it's difficult to divide, really, because rage, will, and choice, they're all kind of wrapped up in each other. So it just depends on which one Achilles gives weight to. I'm not sure if that answers your question. Oh, internet.
Is free will and fate a stopping zone that you have free will for certain moments in your life, and then when important things happen, suddenly fate kicks in? Or is it the coexistence of each other, or if so, is one more influenced than the other, or how's it work out?
Yes, in a general sense, I think fate for us is a lot trickier than it is for Achilles, in the sense that we don't really have a written fate for us. Aside from the fact that, I suppose we'll probably all die in the end, unless I'm not thinking of something, there's no real fate that is said, you shall do this, unless someone else, another human, exerts that upon you, or society, or tradition, or religion, or anything like that. As far as the workings of free will, I would say that free will is something that is constantly in play, and whatever fate we may have is more of the circumstances of the backdrop under which our free will operates, or in the sense that our actions have consequences, so you could say that that is our fate. In that case, the consequences may influence what we may choose, so influence our decisions in that way, but what happens does not necessarily immediately take away our free will and say we do not have a choice in the matter. Jeff.
Yes.
Yes.
So throughout your paper, you mentioned that Achilles is blinded by his rage. Do you think he's really blinded by his rage, or is there something deeper down that's using the rage to blind him?
Oh, so you're saying that like something controlling him rather than him controlling himself?
Or something that he's using to control himself by means of rage? Something besides just rage itself?
Well, I would say the rage comes from the fact that he is both man and God. So in a sense, it is a kind of natural outworking of that, so you could say that controls it. However, I think I may have mentioned this before, I think it's unhelpful and downright possibly just false to say that his rage is necessarily controlled by something that is not him. So it is always Achilles who is acting. Whether or not is the part of him that he wants to be acting is a different story. But to say that his rage is not dictated by him, or that he is propelled in a certain way that he cannot in any way control, it wouldn't be true. It is still Achilles who's acting.
Yeah, so I guess what I was saying is, do you think he's using something else to choose rage?
As in, using something else to choose rage. So are you saying that there's like a deeper emotion or meaning that his rage disguises?
Yeah.
Okay. I believe in a sense, yes, in that his rage is one of the few things that he really can exert. So he is kind of in a bind right now that he does not know which fate he desires to choose. He does not know whether he is man or God, or man and God. And you know, Agamemnon's still there, lurking in the shadows. So, and he's not very fond of him either. So you could say that his rage is an expression of a kind of pent-up desire to do something, but without really knowing what to do. So it's kind of like a flailing about, if you want to describe it that way. No, go ahead.
So I might go off on a tangent, but to what degree, so I'm thinking of, the struggle between two natures, and I'm reminded of Philippians 2, right, when Paul, the very person that said, what a wretched man I am, the good that I want to do, I don't do, and the evil, that's the very thing I do. To what degree can you compare and contrast Achilles and that faith and to Christ? Fully God, fully man, one nature, and then he doesn't want to die, clearly, by his prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane, but he's bound to that which he cannot control, but instead of being rage, it's self-sacrifice. So how do you compare those two?
Yeah, that is difficult. I wouldn't say that Achilles is necessarily a Christ-like figure. The similarities are definitely there. In that, I think in the case of Christ, we often struggle, like, how can God be, or how can Jesus be both fully God and fully man? Isn't that like at war with each other? You can't be 100% this and 100% that. But in the case of Christ, he is both God and man. So I would say that his struggle there is more of an internal struggle, in that he desires this and he desires that, rather than at a war between his manhood and his godhood. Because Christ has already reconciled that within himself. He doesn't have the struggle that Achilles does, in the sense that he does not know what he is. He knows fully what he is. But he still desires things, like just sacrifice himself. That is what he must do. At the same time, he does not wish to go through that pain. He dreads it. So, does that answer?
Yeah.
Wyatt?
Thank you. So, a little bit more topical related. So, throughout the paper, you portray Patroclus as urging on Achilles to, follow his own fate, decide for himself. And yet, right at the end of this paper contract, Patroclus proceeds to, die. And it seems to me that, I don't know, his own fate came upon him, even though he was trying to encourage free will to Achilles. So would you say that his death was his own free will or his fate, even though he tried to pretend that it was free will?
Yes, I would say that what happens to him is obviously not his free will, in the sense that it's not something he can control at all. Because as Achilles says, he may choose glory, and he may yet live long, or he may choose to live long, and then the gods decide he will be cut short and have glory. So in a sense, what happens to him is not with his free will. But I do think that, it does end that way. Patroclus dying and whatnot. But I believe Patroclus's point is not that we can control what will happen, but that we can hope for more. That we can still desire against whatever might still happen. So yes, Patroclus does die. I believe that his actions leading up to that were a part of his free will. Obviously, he couldn't control Apollo coming in, shaking his fist, and he couldn't control the fact that Hector went after him. But he still chose to be out there. However, sad that decision might have been.
Thank you very much, Ms. Acuna.